Hey folks, I'm Jenn Thompson. I'm at UGA. And I am just going to do a little bit of a broad overview of some of the social science work and then hand it off to some of the other colleagues on the social science team to talk a little bit about some of their specifics. So we'll be really brief today. So the social science piece is one that has been growing in multiple iterations of this work as this work has grown. So similar to the kind of on-farm network, starting small and then growing outward, the same thing is true for the social science. So in the water cap iteration of this grant, we proposed to develop an outreach program that was focused on looking at that on-farm network and trying to identify at a much finer grain than in previous work what some of the misconceptions or what some of the values and challenges and motivations of adopting cover crops and the challenges of making management decisions and potential risks then for abandoning that strategy in their management system. And so we have been working on developing a kind of fine grain approach to do that. And I'm going to talk about it in a minute or two. And then as we moved into the SAS cap, again, our scope expanded. And you may have stumbled across in the proposal or elsewhere the idea of an information ecology. And so our focus there from the social science team, among a few other things, has been to look at this cover crop information ecology as a model for approaching research. So I want to stop for just a brief second and sort of explain what we mean by that, right? So early in Stephen's first presentation, he had this slide with a kind of map with all of these kind of moving parts. And that kind of represents how we think about this research project and all of our partners and all of the technological infrastructure and all of the human communication and connection in kind of ecological terms. So we are interested in the way that there are feedback loops and flows among different stakeholders and participants in this process, and even the technologies and the outreach and the research components in this project. And so how do we understand that approach? What does it look like as an approach to doing research? And you've already heard both Chris and Stephen and others talk about the culture of this project. That's kind of what we're getting at. And if we are to kind of map this network of connections early in this process and measure change over time, or try to characterize changes over time, how do we understand the growth of communications within this network, connections within this network, as a potential way to move that needle to support adoption among farmers, both at a policy level and at individual levels to support individual farmers. So we've talked a lot about decision support tools that we hope will come out of this, but then we also have these broader kind of policy level scope and goals. Next slide, please. So, I've said a lot in just that little slide, and it's really kind of abstract, and I'm really asking you to kind of shift gears here. But the point is that we have a kind of telescoping focus in this project, from narrowly focused at the farmers who are participating in our on-farm research and engaging them through work like grower think tanks and field assessments to reflect back to us what is important to them about what we're doing, and how does our research speak to their real day-to-day needs for what kinds of information, all the way out to broad survey and network analysis and interviews and participant observation work that focuses at this ecological level. Both those of us, the 109 of us who are in this meeting right now, and also all of our peripheral stakeholders, policymakers, industry partners, and so on. So, and we have multiple stages of research and analysis that kind of move in and move out from there. So that means that we have a lot of moving parts, just like a lot of the other protocols. And one of our goals is to integrate them as closely as possible with those other protocols. Next slide. So that brings us to the approach to all of this. And if you were at the November meeting, you may remember me talking a little bit about transdisciplinary research, and I'm not going to spend time talking about it so much today, other than to say that this approach really guides what we're doing. And by which I mean that there are both this kind of thread of scientific knowledge that we are trying to build around the impacts of cover crop and management practice and our ability to model and predict how different factors impact the productivity and all of the other biophysical processes related to cover crop use and management. And at the same time, we recognize that the reason we're doing all this research is because there are societal implications, right, around more sustainable ag, around climate change, water use efficiency, input efficiency, yield, economics, and so on. And a transdisciplinary approach says these two things don't operate in separate spheres, but how do we, from a kind of team science perspective, right from the start, bring those together from start to finish in a kind of co-creation of knowledge and protocols. And keep interweaving that braid from start to finish, so that at the end we don't see that the science has gone off and done its thing and the social science has gone off and done its thing, and they don't talk to one another. So what I want to do is kind of give you just a very brief example of how that is currently working in our research. And so next slide, please. So as a very simple example, I know this is too small to see the details, don't worry about it, but the idea is, as Sarah just walked through one of those COBO forms, we put together, in response to talking with the econ team, a broader field survey for our on-farm farmers, in which we asked them a slightly broader suite of questions from that, some of the basic field management information. We asked them questions about how long they've been cover cropping, what some of their broad tillage practices are, what some of their crop insurance practices are, what kind of technology they're using on their operation, and where they go for trusted sources of information. And we put this together in working across a couple of teams. But then importantly, we rely really heavily on our partnership with the on-farm team and with the field techs to go out and collect those data from our farmers. So we had some training with the on-farm team to walk them through this COBO form. I think ours was the first that was used, so we talked about how do you even upload a COBO form. And so we partnered in that process. And then the field team in these beta testing states has gone out or through phone calls primarily, has talked with farmers and helped fill in those data. And from that, we are able to do a couple of things. One is we're able to get a snapshot of who our farmers are, what our farms look like. And so, for example, here on the right, you can see that we were able to survey farmers from 6 states, 31 farms. We can see what the mean and min and max kind of range of farm sizes are. And that helps us see that, for example, we're going from fairly small farms to quite large farms across these spaces. But our mean is about, I can't really even see, 1,900 acres, for example. And of that, we are able to get a sense of what that land is in cover crops as well, how much are being cover cropped. And what this, for example, is allowing us to do going forward is, one, we're able to see as a whole, what does our on-farm network look like as a practice? But also, as we move forward in sampling and selecting farms for future research, we are able to purposefully select them based on some farm characteristics to invite them to participate in other components of the research. So let me just say one, next slide, please. I'll say one quick thing about our team at Georgia, and then I'll hand it over to some of my colleagues. So our team at Georgia includes me and Melissa Ray, a PhD student, and Maria Teresa Tancredi, who will be a PhD student beginning in January. And our focus is really on a couple of things. One is coordinating the collaboration across the social science team. The other is developing that kind of finer grain assessment, as I said, around adoption to roll out in a set of card sorts and interviews with farmers and then other stakeholders going forward. To partner with Extension to build some community-based social marketing strategies. So how do we tailor our support strategies based on our findings from that finer grain analysis to then take advantage of what we're learning in that context, partnering with Extension to pilot them and then evaluate them. And then broadly taking that very wide lens view around what is that information ecology? What are the varieties of shared perspectives and priorities among our stakeholders? And how is this model of research impacting adoption, moving the needle going forward? Last slide. Our page on the team portal is not up quite yet, but when it is, it will also have all of that same contact information and resources that all of the other sites have. So please, please check there. It will have our Google group address. It will include a slide deck with all of the members of our social science team, our meeting notes, and please feel free to join us anytime for our monthly meeting, which is at 12:30 Eastern on the first Tuesday of the month. That's it for me. I am going to hand it over to my partner, Meredith Niles in Vermont.
Thanks, Jen. So I don't have any slides, so you can all take a break from looking at slides and just look at my face. So this is not my slides that you're seeing. I wanted to share some updates and remind everybody about the network analysis that we're working on and the large survey. So I'm an assistant professor at the University of Vermont. I'm leading the quantitative research for the social science team as part of PSA. And really this is survey work, not only with farmers, but also across our stakeholder network. And what we're really trying to do through that process is to understand and to map the information ecology that Jen just talked about. And right now the team is just myself, but I have a postdoctorate who will be starting in September. His name is Guang Han, and he's coming from Iowa State University from their Sustainable Agriculture program, PhD, and also a master's in agricultural education. So he has a great background also in statistics and will be working with me on the survey and the network analysis. So I just wanted to share a couple of things about our plan for the survey, what it's going to look like, why it's novel, when it's coming, and things that would be useful to hear from this network of people as well. And the first thing I want to say about this survey effort, this quantitative effort, is that this is not meant to be sort of another farmer survey about cover crops. There has been a lot of research done already in the social science context about farmers' adoption of cover crops. We have a good understanding of some of the barriers. We have a good understanding of many of the techniques and practices and on-farm management tools that people are using for cover crop adoption. And so we want to build on the existing evidence that we already have and really try to broaden and expand our understanding, especially as it relates to the information ecology and what that means for driving maintenance and continued adoption of cover crops. So the goal for this survey is to go out in the winter of 2021. And to reiterate, it's not only going to include farmers, but also our sort of entire network. So it's very possible, if not likely, that all of you will get some version of a survey as well to better understand how information is shared about cover crops across different networks. The survey will be going out, across many different states, if not nationally. And I want to iterate the importance of that. Rob Myers, who's going to be speaking after me, has been doing cover crop surveys of farmers within many different SARE networks nationally for a number of years. And most of the other existing studies in this space are really state specific. So for example, the state of Iowa through the Iowa poll and a number of other efforts, have really surveyed farmers consistently about cover crop adoption. So we know a lot about that through Rob's work, through SARE, and we also have some specific states that have had deeper dives on this information. But we're trying to capture some other things at scale. And so some of the novelty that we're planning on banking on for our work is using a comparative random sample of farmers in addition to a sample of farmers that are in the network. Part of what we want to understand is not just cover crop adopters and what their information is and what their management looks like, but also a random sample of non-adopters. And so this will add a lot of nuance and understanding to not just people who are within our network, but also for people outside of a cover crop network, what does their information ecology look like? We're also planning to use network science and to map the information ecology. So when I say network science, I mean we are proposing to use social network analysis to actually more explicitly understand the links between different types of people and actors as they relate to sharing cover crop information and perpetuating cover crop tools and resources. And really by mapping this network, we're able to do a number of things. We'll understand, first of all, who are brokers in these networks, who's at the core of these networks, who are the main people who are sharing this, and what does that mean in terms of who is not connected to those types of people. And this is really different than approaches that have been used before to understand cover crop information and cover crop adoption. So for example, most surveys have really asked sort of two kinds of questions to farmers about information. They ask how they want to receive information, so via websites or the internet or newsletters, for example. And they ask information about who they currently get information from. So from Extension or from NRCS, sort of broad categories of people. The goal of our survey is actually to go deeper than that, to yes, continue to understand at a large scale the sources of information that farmers want, which can feed into the tools that we develop, but also to really identify individual people and specific players within the networks that may have significant influence on information ecology through cover crops. So this really gives us the capacity, like I said, to sort of see the whole network, visualize it, and then to dig into it and understand who the core actors are, who may not be connected to them, what does it mean to be a core actor, and to then disseminate information or to be a conduit of information. So what we've done so far, we've mapped out, Melissa, who is a PhD student at University of Georgia with Jenn, has mapped out all of the existing surveys that we could find that have asked about cover crop adoption. And along with an undergraduate student that Jenn is also working with, we've really identified the questions that have been asked in these surveys so that we can explicitly add novelty and not replicate what's been done before. We've also surveyed our team about their data needs that they might want to know from farmers. So you might have gotten a short 4-question survey from me a few months ago. So we're also trying to make sure that when we do this analysis, especially with farmers, we are capturing data that could be useful to other teams across our network as well. We've also added questions to the Farmer Kobo survey that Jenn talked about, beginning to understand sort of the suite of different information sources that farmers rely on to populate our survey. And we're working on survey development in collaboration with other teams like the econ team and the data team. So that's just a brief update from me about where we're at. Things will really be ramping up on developing the survey and reaching out to stakeholders, including many people on this call, for consultation, and also looking for feedback from people on the call about identifying all the stakeholders that should be included in our information ecology. So things will be really ramping up in that space over the next 6 months to meet our goals and deadlines for a winter survey deployment in 2021. So thanks for the opportunity to share more about what we're doing in this space. And I am happy to hear from anybody if you have any questions or feedback on that process. Thanks so much.
Well, thanks, Meredith. I'm Rob Myers, based at the University of Missouri and with the SARE program. And we wanted to move on here just briefly to cover crop economics. So there are several members of this team. Some are listed here, and then other members of the social sciences team are also contributing. As you heard Meredith talking about the survey, that will be part of what will contribute to the economic data we have available. I want to emphasize that we're going to be looking not just at the profit of cover crops and their impact in management, but also the risk impacts. Many of you know that one of the real roles cover crops can play is in contributing to resilience of cropping systems. And so we're going to be trying to get a better handle on how we can evaluate that and what the data can tell us about risk and resilience. So Rod in particular has a lot of background in crop insurance and risk management related to conservation. And so he'll be helping a lot with that. Ray Massey has also worked with crop insurance some, but also broadly based in farm management and economics. And he and Alan Weber will be leading some partial budget analyses. And again, we'll be using some survey data. If we could go to the next slide, please. So there's a few different ways we're going to try to get at economics, and this will evolve as the project goes forward. Again, you heard Meredith talking about some of the survey instruments, so we'll be using not only the survey coming up in this winter, but also some of the recent survey data, including the new SARE CTIC survey data, which will have a report out later in July, doing some additional analyses of the data from that, from over 1,000 farmers. We will be making use of some of the field level data from the PSA project. So that includes the on-farm trials, looking at yields from cover crops versus no cover crops, looking a bit at common experiment number 1, how we're getting some responses to nitrogen, and common experiment number 2. Now there's some limitations in those 2 experiments in terms of, applying that to farm situations because they are controlled experiments, and but we do think we'll gain some insights there that will be helpful for the economics. And then we've also been discussing in the economics group the opportunity to maybe do some case studies, looking at individual farmers' management choices, and probably particularly target some of the farmers who are involved in some of the on-farm work. So a lot of the economics work will be happening following the upcoming survey this winter and as we start to get data from the field trials. But this will certainly be an important part of the project going forward. And as with all other parts of the project, we'll welcome input from any of the team members or ideas you have for data sources that may contribute to the economics effort. So thanks, and I think we're going to Ankita next.
Yes, hi folks. So thank you for having me. My name is Ankita Raturi. I am an assistant professor at Purdue University where I run the Agricultural Informatics Lab. So I'm going to try and give you a trimmed down version of a talk that I actually just gave on behalf of the Privacy Committee a couple of days ago at an Ag Data Privacy Conference. So my work is actually a little bit of a couple of different things within PSA, working on the DSTs, but also working with the social science team to try and think about how we can cultivate trust in our collaborative, as well as doing some of the human-centered design work. So trying to think about how we can try to make sure that we're giving different types of stakeholders the types of things that they're looking for. Next slide, please. So what we've witnessed today is a pretty complex trust landscape, I would argue, right? We're about 40 organizations spread across 33 states with a variety of on-farm research partners conducting a range of coordinated research, education, and extension projects. So this sets the scene for a landscape where we have different stakeholders with a varied set of data sharing needs, usage constraints, different levels of privacy required. We have multi-stakeholder ownership of data. And so what we need is a coherent set of mechanisms to think about how we want to actually mediate trust in our complex network of, people, values, objectives, and their associated data models and tools. And so what we started to do is try to actually think about how a theory of trust, next slide please, can start to emerge from what we're witnessing happen within PSA. And so this is a little bit of grounded theory in action where we're actually seeing some of the pillars of trust emerge from things that people have already started doing. So, you know, if we reframe that information ecology diagram to actually describe what the data life cycle looks like, you know, we have data coming from these research stations as well as the on-farm projects. We have them going through a variety of permission databases and data exploration tools, and then we will have all these different use cases between the decision support tools and models, but also the work that's being done by extension education that we'll hear about after the jump. Next slide, please. And so we can also see, you know, as these different tools and research protocols mature, we're beginning to see, you know, there's some of that early stuff. So Paula talked about the drought stress cam to be able to describe to us, you know, what some of these alpha technologies could look like. And there we have an opportunity for at least beginning to think about, okay, what might the stakeholders need early on. I know there's a lot of work in the more mature projects. So Sarah shared quite a bit about the on-farm project, where we now start to see how they really thought through a lot of the actual, how do we instantiate privacy and ownership within the group, thinking about things like roles and rules. And so there are a variety of different levels of trust that you can think of also, or levels of privacy or levels of control as these technologies mature and move from being in this sort of alpha phase to actually being rolled out to the full on-farm project. Next slide, please. So I think a lot of attention has been spent on actually thinking about data flow, much to the success of the data flow team. Within PSA, so, you know, we have things like the permission dashboard, the permission database that Aurelie's been working on, the internal tech dashboard that a variety of folks have been working on, as well as the farmer-facing dashboard for providing feedback to farmers that Brian's been working on. And so these are all examples of how we have started to think about access and control and different kinds of rules around engagement with PSA data. As we're now starting to think a little bit more broadly to include a variety of ag and tech research partners, we thought it was important for us to actually take a little step back and think about how we want some of these practices that have emerged from within PSA to become codified for us to be able to share outside of PSA. And so this was some of the incentive for the privacy committee coming together. And so we are, I think all the names are on the front slide as well as they'll be on the last one, a group of folks who are really trying to think about how do we actually want to start to codify some of the rules of engagement and actually think of, you know, start to actually create a framework for trust, articulate this in the collaboration agreement, but then also work with each of the different teams to make sure that these rules of engagement are technically feasible, as well as things that are actually protecting and respecting the rights of the different data stakeholders. And so I wanted to mostly provide this slide as a way to sort of contextualize why we're even starting to think about trust in a more formal fashion right now. Next slide, please. So when I think about trust and sort of thinking about what this emergent theory looks like, there are these two parts to it. And I think the really important piece is that, you know, we want to make sure that, yes, we are trusted with data, but that we're also trusted in the process. And so what we have is, you know, on the one hand, we have a lot of efforts that have already been done to make sure that privacy is handled. So I know that, for example, right now, the social science team and the data flow team are in talks to try and make sure that as IRB data starts coming into play, the databases are actually able to respect what those requirements might look like, and that the technology that's being developed actually mediates the type of privacy restrictions that people need. And so that includes things like trying to think about how we handle geolocation information, providing granular data access to different things, and so on and so forth. I think there's been a lot of discussion about transparency and accountability between the dashboards and GitHub, and sort of making sure that everybody can sort of look under the hood and see how things are done. And so that's just a little bit of how we've been thinking about trust in the process. Next slide, please. And so, you know, we have the social infrastructure to cultivate trust. This really consists of the privacy committee, but also the work that they're doing between the project teams and the technology teams. So I'll leave this just up here. I know these slides are available for you all to look. We are going to be articulating a lot of this in a paper that will be coming up and will be circulated in the group. And so I don't necessarily want to go through this into too much detail, but mostly use this as a time to provide a teaser for how we're thinking about cultivating trust. Next slide, please. And again, Thank you. So we're thinking about trust as a work in progress. The collaboration agreement and paper draft will be in your inboxes in a couple of weeks, and you should be able to actually provide feedback. And if you want to get engaged in any of these topics, we meet weekly right now because we're trying to make sure that everything gets done as soon as possible. And if you have any thoughts on privacy and how to codify rules for engagement within our network, please feel free to reach out so we can have a little chat about social and technical infrastructure for cultivating trust in PSA. And I think that's all I have.